Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. How's it going?
Good, good. So it's Labor Day, which
It is
means
indeed.
we probably should be doing other stuff, but we're streaming this morning because we're that dedicated. Plus, a lot of our audience doesn't actually live in the United States, so we figure we'll keep doing the Monday morning data chat. So
Plus, I guess they're not working, so they have time to listen to us. They've got nothing better to do.
this is also true. So yeah, so thanks to anyone tuning in this morning. And this morning we're going to talk about something that we've been noticing, I would say anecdotally. A lot of people are asking us about how to hire data engineers, if we know of anyone who's looking for work, as well as how to keep the data engineers they have around. So what are you seeing out there, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, I think that matches my experience. We get asked about data engineers all the time, but also you were looking at this DICE report this morning, and some of the data here agrees with what we've seen, and some of it maybe doesn't quite so much.
Right. Yeah. I mean, let's first talk about, we'll hop into the DICE, Q2 tech job report in a second. But I mean, what are some of the anecdotes we're seeing out there? I mean, I know I have friends from, obviously lots of small to mid-sized companies asking us if we know of any data engineers looking for work. But then we're talking also about, people at FANG companies reaching out to us as well, asking us if we know data engineers. And I find that's a bit surprising, right? Because I would think that these companies have armies of recruiters and access to the best talent, but they're coming to, people like us.
Yeah, it's a curious situation. So the story I've heard about a lot of these FANG companies, this is kind of anecdotal. I don't know if there's actually data to support this, but supposedly Google's philosophy was always you suck up as much like right out of college talent as you can, and then you develop people from there. So you just like hire armies of people, and then you start differentiating them. Some will be software developers, some will be data engineers working back in the day on GFS and other technologies. So it is really curious, right? If that's true, if Google, Facebook, Amazon have been doing this for a long time, that they would see any kind of shortage, right? You would assume that they would have so much in-house talent that they would never really run out. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore, especially, I suppose, with people churning out of those companies over time because of stress or because of, COVID and remote work policies and other things going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm hearing this from other people too. I would say, people around the country, but friends asking, okay, so is it just me, or does it seem like hiring data engineers is really challenging right now? And I have to say, well, I don't think it's you. I think it's just it really is happening right now. But and then it's interesting. I mean, but let's talk about this DICE report real quick. So let me just open this up.
Yep.
Great. So yeah, DICE Q2 2021 tech job report. I mean, in general, I think their methodology is pretty sound. I mean, they have access to, I think they say over 1 billion job postings, and they do a sample of, well over 1 million. So I think this is a strong representation. It's sure beats, kind of our anecdotes here. But yeah, I mean, job postings have grown a lot. It indicates that there's a desire to hire. And I mean, interestingly, the growth in geographies, for example, it really speaks to the nature of the change in remote, right? Vegas, Sacramento, Alabama, Tennessee are seeing the biggest growth. This is interesting. Salt Lake. I mean, I see this here too.
We've seen a lot of people move in from all over the country. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I mean, Vegas is surprising. I mean, because that city was like basically written off for dead last year. Right. So,
so apparently they're doing something right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, this is interesting. So these are geographies. And, I don't think a day goes by I don't meet somebody who's moved to Salt Lake, for example, which is where we live, who's moved here from most likely the Bay Area or California or someplace, and then a lot of people work in tech. So, but, there's been a mass migration all over the place, frankly.
Yeah, there has. So. And it's a very dynamic situation too. I mean, I think we both know several people who kind of showed up here for a while, just like, go anywhere. So let's go to Salt Lake and visit some friends. And then the next thing I would hear, like, oh yeah, we just bought a house in Salt Lake.
Right.
Part of the reason housing prices here are absolutely insane.
It's insane. I was just looking at the Zillow estimate for one of my places here, and I was pretty floored.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's flattering, but it's totally crazy. But this is happening everywhere right now. I think people can live wherever they want. They can work wherever they want. And I think with COVID as well, even though there was some talk about everybody going back to the office, it seems like a lot of those plans have been derailed, at least for a short while, if not longer. So.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. I think it's a tough time for businesses, including ours, in the sense that there's so much uncertainty in the market. It's a little bit hard to plan for the future. I mean, we're a 100% remote company, so it's a less of a problem for us. But still, like we like working on site with clients when we can, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen much anytime in the future. There are questions about whether COVID is going to maybe become a seasonal disease, and we just have to deal with it for the next decade or so. So who knows?
Yep. Yeah. But I think remote's here to stay. I mean, regardless of whatever, a lot of these, I think there's a lot of people who say, oh yeah, the remote's going to be dead. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I highly doubt it. I mean, it's, so that's one factor, right? So like hiring people has changed a lot. I also think there's a great reshuffling where people given the chance to, kind of work remote or be furloughed, frankly. I mean, they found maybe a new path in life that they weren't willing to go back. You can look at restaurants as an example of this, where if you've ever worked in a retail or food service, like I have, and I do not miss those days at all. It's could brutal. Never see going back. It's tough work.
Yeah.
And dealing with just how like triggered everybody is these days. I can't imagine being a food service worker or a retail or flight attendant. Like I would, no.
Okay, let me ask you this. So I just thought of this now, and I'll bring up another point in a second. Do you think the move to remote work is also going to drive a shift toward more cloud services? So in other words, if I'm, say, an online retailer and I have a data center, am I going to be looking at that saying, maybe I don't want to have a data center because then I have to have employees on site, creates all kinds of headaches. If it's all cloud, then it can all be remote. I don't have to have anyone managing hardware, machines, the physical facilities, those kinds of things.
I mean, are you looking for my opinion or are you looking for the facts?
I'm looking for your opinion. I mean, then we can look for data later.
The facts bear this out. The facts bear this out. I mean, I can point you to any number of articles that, have shown the explosion of cloud growth. So I don't think you need my opinion to tell you that, like, during 2020 and 2021, like a lot of our cloud partners are busier than ever. What basically COVID did is it pulled in like 5 to 10 years of progress, and brought it forward. So yeah, I mean, it's not really an opinion at this point if cloud's, going to see traction. It already did. Yeah. So, but let's look at some occupations real quick. So I think our whole thought, like, we get hit up a lot for data engineering hires and so forth. But I think if you look at Dice's report, at least, and the numbers that they show, I think it's a bit different, right? So if we look at the, and let me just blow this up a bit so the viewers can see it. So, but let's take a look at this. Okay. So if we had, I think this is ranked by total number of job postings here, and then it's percent change. Right. So software developer, no surprise. It's a popular occupation. But then, data engineer is like 29. So not even like middle of the pack. And the growth is 15% in job postings. So that's not even like that impressive if you compare it to the ranking of, percent growth and, occupational type here. SAP architect is number 1 for whatever reason, right? UI, UX design, and so forth. Data engineer doesn't show up here. So I think, but then again, you have BI developer that does show up. Cloud architect, software architect does show up.
Database administrator, which can cross over with data engineer. It really depends on the details of the job.
It does, right? Yeah. And so part of this, I think we're kind of wondering, is this sort of an overlap? What I think it actually is, is more selection bias. Like you and I are probably getting hit up for data engineering jobs precisely because it's the field we're in.
Yeah.
So, with that said, it's still growing a ton. It's not like you're, a cybersecurity analyst, which is 3%, which I think is kind of surprising as well.
Yeah, and the other thing I found interesting is that things to jobs specifically to do with cloud don't show up too much in this report. Like if you go to fastest growing tech occupations by job posting volume, the last one on there is cloud architect. And maybe that just has to do with the hierarchy of how they sort jobs. So in other words, senior data analyst, are they breaking that out by like cloud specific skills like Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift, those kinds of things? Or is it just all classified together? It's hard to say. I don't know, but I found that interesting that like you don't see cloud specific jobs too much in this report.
Yeah, so it's an interesting observation. I'm kind of curious if it's baked in or what. So,
or is it just the fact that if they're focusing on the like largest specific professions, we've both talked about how the cloud is growing rapidly, but it's still small in the enterprise space. Like we expect it to blow up in the next decade. And so maybe in absolute terms, like we work in a cloud world, not everyone does. There's still a lot of on-prem out there. And so maybe in absolute terms, cloud is just still small for many of these enterprises. And that's why we're not seeing as much. I don't know.
Because I think, I mean, just going off of like the postings, with the title and stuff,
Exactly.
right? So it's hard to say, because if you were to make a job posting for data engineer, in this day and age, I mean, would you? I think it's implicit that the cloud would be a part of that, right? I don't know. I mean, depending where you work, but I don't think that you'd be saying, well, come work in our like awesome on-prem environment that we made from scratch, right? Like that would be a way to probably attract like very few candidates.
Right.
Let's talk about that for a bit, though. What would be some ways that would make your company attractive to a data engineer?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because of course it's Labor Day, and part of what we wanted to talk about is things like work-life balance and making people's lives better. And the tech industry can be pretty brutal in some ways, especially jobs that are related to ops, to keeping systems up and running. And data engineering does tend to cross over into an operational role where you've got to like maintain systems, make sure they stay online, have on-call times and cycles and such. So, yeah. You brought up the saying, people don't leave their jobs, they leave their managers, which I think can be very true. Say a little bit more about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an old saying, right? People don't leave their jobs, they leave their managers. But they also seek out great managers, right? So if you're trying to hire, I would say, it's in this day and age, because you aren't working in an office, right? It makes it a bit trickier, because how are you going to get to know this person? So I would say if you're a hiring manager, maybe have a bit more of a public facing presence, on social media, for example. Talk about the cool things your company is doing. Because I think you can also say like, people don't join a job; they join a team. They join, a manager, and that's almost the equivalent statement in some ways. And they will also leave you if you end up, violating whatever pact of trust you had. So, I think that. Let me see here. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna guess what the number one predictor is in most attrition models. It's manager and its team. I've seen these before. So, but I would also say too, given the number of options available, I mean, it's a job seekers market at this point. The quicker I think as a hiring manager you realize this, I think. I'm not going to say you'll be successful, just because I think there is an actual shortage of talent out there. I want to dig into the numbers more before I equivocally say that. But everywhere I go, where are you going to find data engineers, right? So hiring's tough, right? And the FANG companies, if they're having trouble finding people, that may or may not mean much for you, but I would say that they have a lot of resources. And even in this DICE report too, I mean, this isn't data engineering specific, but let's look at the top employers here, for example, by job posting volume. And again, this could either indicate like they have a lot of jobs. It doesn't tell you like what's been filled, but let me just show you this real quick.
Well, because they have to, generally, you, as a matter of policy and the law, you have to post jobs if you're going to do internal promotions, right? So this can just mean a lot of people shuffling internally at a place like Google. Who knows?
Yeah. So Amazon's number one, Uber, Infosys. And we've heard through the grapevine, even like big consulting firms right now, like they can't take on certain projects with some people that we know. They can't take on any more projects internally at these companies because they just don't have the people. So there's that. But again, this doesn't like break it out by data or whatever occupation. So it's just in general tech jobs. But as you can see.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something where I almost have other questions about this. So for the fact that the cloud jobs and non-cloud jobs aren't broken out separately, I think in data engineering, there's also some reduction happening. And by that, I mean, there likely are going to be fewer Teradata on-prem jobs in the future, for example. Like Teradata is going all in on cloud. And we're seeing, eventually some of these on-prem systems are going to disappear. There are going to be fewer Hadoop on-prem jobs. In fact, there are going to be fewer Hadoop jobs in general. And so the sector of data engineering, I think where we operate, is seeing a lot of growth. Other sectors of data engineering that would fall under that umbrella maybe are shrinking. And so without breaking that data out separately, it's hard to get some of those details. Maybe it's just my guess. I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, I would like to get more stats on this kind of stuff too, just in terms of specifics of job postings. Right. If anybody has anything like that, please let us know, like where they're seeing the big trends. But it's one thing to post, though. I think it's another thing to understand who's like what jobs are getting filled as a result of postings, and that's not being shown, right? So.
Yeah. So what jobs aren't getting filled? Like they create these postings and they can't find people. Like that would be very interesting data to have.
Right. Because it's the other side of the coin, right? Like we can make 1 million job postings. Might cost us a lot of money, but we could do it. And that's no guarantee, obviously, that, we'll have any jobs to fill so anyway, it's an interesting one, but yeah, hiring right now is tough across the board. I would say, you talk to any technology leader, data or not, and they have and it keeps them up at night. Like, how am I going to build my team right now? And so maybe we can talk about some ways that you can augment your team without having to hire externally.
Yeah. And so, how can you do more with a small team, for example? One of the things I brought up in our notes is that, like, in data engineering, there's this long tradition of undifferentiated heavy lifting. And of course, this kind of made sense in a different era. I don't think it makes as much sense now. Like, how would you describe undifferentiated heavy lifting? What are we talking about here?
I mean, basically, a classic one we always bring up is writing connectors for stuff that's already been solved. Like, so making a MySQL to Snowflake connector from scratch. Like, you're wasting your time. There's like 1 million things out there that already do that. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, you see a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting, and transformations is another one. Like, anyway, I think everyone wants to work on what they consider to be special Snowflake systems, but really, for the most part, I would say it's already been solved, and you can find stuff off the shelf. So
well, and I think one thing we're both aware of is that if you choose to run your own Hadoop cluster, so by that I mean typically your own hardware, typically install the software and everything, that takes a lot of man hours. Like, it takes a lot of work to, first of all, set it up, but second, just to maintain it, update it, fix problems with updates. And alternatively, if you want Hadoop, you can just use something like Elastic MapReduce on AWS, and that's turnkey. Like, you basically make a few selections, click a button, and it spins up, and then you destroy it when you're done. And like the number of man hours of work involved is far, far less if you do that.
But it's interesting though, how many data engineering job postings do you still see that require Hadoop as a skill?
Yeah,
it's crazy. So I see this a lot, but then when I dig underneath the hood, I find out they're not even using Hadoop, and they just list it as like a skill because they found somewhere like, oh, well, a data engineer needs to have these skills. Therefore, our job posting needs to attract data engineers. Therefore, we have to list, even though Hadoop is totally unnecessary. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think Hadoop's the new COBOL. So if you're using it, good for you. I do think that in most companies, it's going the way of the dinosaur, and
exactly
that's how it is. So
and if you're still using it, like, at least consider your options, because you may be able to take that same team and reallocate them from maintaining your cluster to doing more interesting things in the cloud potentially. And that's the undifferentiated heavy lifting part.
Big time. Yeah. And so I think maybe, another way to build internally is maybe, reshuffle the skills. And I think actually Mary has a good comment here. My company has no dedicated data engineers. The software devs do, and data architects do a mixture of some of these activities. What I find interesting is that you have a data architect, but no data engineers. But apart from that observation, and this kind of leads to a point, right, where software developers, I think, could make good data engineers. Your data scientists are probably doing some data engineering by default. At least it's been Matt and I's experience personally. So, what are your thoughts on building from within?
I think it's very, very important now. In fact, I think we've tried to do the same thing, like hiring people as interns and then helping them develop talent along the way, because it has been very hard for us to find, consultants who frankly aren't outrageously expensive in the data engineering space. I think specifically going into data engineering, transitioning from software development, people have to develop data intuition. So in other words, you have to transition from the notion of like single events, which is typically what you're dealing with in a software domain, to handling huge amounts of data. But it's something that like talented people can do with the right mentorship. And so I think it really pays off to have that internal mentorship, so that when you identify people who want to go into data, they have the opportunity to develop those skills without leaving your company. Because if they have to leave, you'll probably not get them back. They'll go somewhere else.
This is true. Because again, people don't leave their jobs. They tend to leave their team and their managers, right? So, and I would say also, I think there's increasingly a good argument for just automating a lot of the undifferentiated heavy lifting, which would allow you to maybe think harder about the type of data engineer you want to hire and what they'd be doing. I think what we see is a lot of people think, oh, we need to hire a data engineer so they can build pipelines into our data warehouse. And I'm like, that's very much a solved problem, unless you have a very specific API you're looking at.
Right, exactly. There's the sunk cost fallacy that we see over and over again. So people will look at something like Fivetran or Airbyte and say, oh, well, that costs money. I don't want to spend money. It's like, yeah, but how much is the time of your engineers costing you? And it's like, well, no, but I'm already paying them, so it doesn't matter. It's like, well, yes, but what are they not getting done because they're sitting there writing, custom Python code to do something that's just turnkey and takes 5 minutes in Fivetran? That's what you have to take into account. Yeah. And that fits right in with this, because if you there's much less of a need for custom Hadoop skills now than there was in the past, because a lot of it is turnkey in the cloud. And I think that's another broader trend we've been seeing for the last decade or so, which is that software devs have been kind of crossing over with operational roles and architectural roles in the cloud. That if you're a talented software dev, you're on a small team, you can develop some skills to actually be able to build out some infrastructure in the cloud to actually run systems. You have to be careful with that. The number one danger is that someone screws up security or privacy, right? Like, you have to make sure that people are adequately trained to not mess something up in a very serious way. But otherwise, there can be a lot of crossover.
I think so. And I had this conversation with somebody a couple of weeks ago where, their company wanted to hire a data engineer, again, just to basically pipe data into Snowflake. And I'm like, you realize you could just get Fivetran and do that. And because I asked them, okay, so what's going to happen after the data engineer does this, right? After they build the pipelines into your data warehouse, like what other work are they going to be doing? It's like, well, I don't know. So I thought, well, okay, so now you're going to have a board engineer, and a board engineer is a dangerous engineer, because what do engineers like to do?
Exactly. They like
to engineer.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I would limit the blast radius. I would have actual work for them to do and not just hire a data engineer just for the sake of it. I mean, the cost you're going to spend on, Fivetran, Snowflake, for example, and solving that workload is much, much less than the, 6-figure salary you're going to be paying a data engineer who's probably just going to get bored and leave your company actually at some point because you haven't thought through enough work. I mean, that's what I'm talking about with undifferentiated heavy lifting these days. Yeah. Piping data into a data warehouse is not a big deal. You don't, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I think you don't need a data engineer for that anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that we frequently run into connectors or APIs where there are no connectors, which you brought up earlier. And that's, you really need to go through your list of connections and say, okay, where are we actually going to have to do some custom work here? And does it make sense to hire someone to do that, or to just subcontract if it's only a small slice of the work that needs to be done?
So, Ask DevOps has a good question here. Is software engineering must become a data engineer? I see my company focuses 70% on software engineering skills and just 30% on data engineering, which sounds weird to me. Your opinion? What are your thoughts, Matt?
I mean, it depends on the details of the role, I think, and the complexity, right? I think one place where there are a couple of places where software engineering still shows up. If you are using a lot of kind of bleeding edge open source software, then you might have the need to customize that software, put in pull requests if you're using the latest frameworks. If you're doing complex orchestration with something like Airflow or Dagster, for instance, those are pipelines as code platforms. And to use them well, I've seen them used badly, but to use them well, you do need good software engineering skills. Um, where else? I mean, those are some of the main drivers until you maybe cross over to ML engineering. The thing I would question maybe is the 70% number, because I would be more interested first in data intuition. In other words, understanding fundamentally how data works, and then maybe a little bit less interested in the software development part. Again, unless so, what are their basic logical skills for processing data? Do they have really strong SQL skills? And then, if they need custom frameworks, can they code in Spark, for example? What are your thoughts on this?
I think it depends on your company, really.
Yeah.
If it's 70% software engineering skills, I think that's highly dependent upon your company's circumstances and needs. Because there's not a one size fits all, but I would say in general, like software engineering is an undercurrent of data engineering.
Yeah. I agree.
I think data engineer without software engineering skills really can't call themselves an engineer per se. Maybe with increased abstraction, I could sort of make an argument about that you might be able to call yourself a data engineer still, but it's sort of tomato. But I would say it doesn't hurt you to have good software engineering skills. I think it actually hinders you significantly if you don't. Because what are you going to do when you need to code something?
Yeah, that's right. And I think we need to dig into the details of what the 70% number means. I mean, I would say it's probably not a good idea to look for someone with 10 years of Java experience or something. In other words, you're filtering out a lot of really good candidates at that point. But you do want people who have basic software intuition, who understand version control, who understand testing, like these basic software principles, so they can apply them in their work as a data engineer.
Yeah. Got another question here. I get the posting of jobs, but the biggest challenge that I have been experiencing from an African point of view is a lack of understanding of the day-to-day of what maybe a data engineer is supposed to be doing within the company. How can you advise a company that is looking for a data-related individual? How do they know that they should be looking for a data scientist instead of a data analyst or a statistician?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. Yeah, I don't know if I have a real clear answer to this one off the top of my head. I do think that we saw in the era of data science, it's still the era of data science, right? But then like the data science explosion a few years back, data science was so hot that companies didn't realize that a lot of their fundamental value was going to come from more basic propositions like just automation and reporting and processing and such.
Yeah, so, the analytics.
Yeah.
I think it kind of depends on, I would almost invert the question and ask, okay, so like, what does your company need? I think that's where I would start. And then focus on what those skills are. And I think only after you have done that can you really say, okay, so that looks like it's a data engineering type of a job. But then I guess it's sort of the question of a lack of understanding of the day-to-day of what a data engineer is supposed to be doing. I don't think there is like a one-size-fits-all answer to what the day-to-day of a data engineer, nor would there be for a data scientist or an analyst. It's sort of what the last question asked about software engineering. And I think it highly depends on the type of company you're at and what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, let me paint a typical scenario. So actually, you're a big advocate for Excel still being a valuable tool even in 2021, which I tend to agree with. However, there comes a time when companies start to outgrow Excel, and that's kind of where they start to need data engineering. So in other words, they're doing a lot of reporting manually. You've got someone who's downloading data, loading it into Excel, trying to do some basic processing on it, and then they hand a report to their boss. And they do this day after day after day. Data engineering starts where it's like, okay, let's automate all of those processes. And instead of using Excel, let's use an actual database like Snowflake or BigQuery, something that's off the shelf where I don't have to hire a huge team and sign a multi-million-dollar contract to get in the door. And then data engineer can help you to build those data flows. A lot of that reporting that you were doing manually can start to be automated at the level of kind of analytics engineering. And then down the road, if you want to do more complex automated statistics, machine learning, data science, then that data engineer can start looking into sophisticated transformations, cleaning, observability of data from there.
Mm-hmm. I tend to agree. Yeah. I mean, I would go back and look at Monica Rigatti's article, The Data Science Hierarchy of Needs.
Yes.
I still think that she has a pyramid basically that has like AI at the top and everything else at the bottom, basically data engineering and analytics. I would say start there, and work from that rubric. I still think it, 4 years later ish, it still holds weight. So we got another question here. Just joins. This may have been covered. There isn't a talent shortage, just a shortage of skills specific to data engineering. Thoughts?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with this one. That goes back to the idea of the fact that you can start with software developers and develop them into data engineers. And it also crosses over with some of these fundamentals issues of maybe data engineers who've not stayed up to date on their skills, who could, but they don't have the current skills, like they're all in on an older database system and don't know how to operate in the cloud at all. And so if you're a company, you have the option of layoffs, or you can say, look, these are talented people, can we train them into a new set of skills so that they can contribute in a new way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's almost an interesting tautology though, right? Because you would have a shortage of, talent sort of assumes you have skills, right? So, to some degree, obviously you could be talented at picking up new stuff, but then in order to be useful, you still have to have skills. Right. Because you're talented at baseball doesn't mean I'd hire you as a data engineer. Right. So, and so I think what the argument really is, it's about retooling and reskilling people, as you sort of indicated. There's probably a lot of talented people out there who, just probably need to pick up data engineering skills. So I think it's an interesting question in that it's almost self-evident in the answer. Yeah. But then I would like to see numbers that show that there's a shortage of data engineering skills. I think anecdotally, we both see this, just for the simple fact that people ask us, how do I become a data engineer? Or how do I hire a data engineer? But again, the people that we know, I know a lot of talented technologists who aren't data engineers, who I think could be great data engineers if they wanted to be. On the flip side, I know a lot of people who I'd say who have skill but have no talent. And this is sort of the reverse tautology. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, though. Unpack the word talent for a bit. Like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So for me, it's hard to, so problem-solving skills, right? People can develop problem-solving skills, but I don't know, there's a certain level of talent maybe required to develop that skill. Some jobs, even in tech, are very, very rote, and people have a hard time transitioning from like a rote job to a problem-solving type job where they have to learn new things and improvise. I don't know. That's kind of how I interpret it.
Yeah. So maybe we're bike shedding this one here.
Perhaps,
yeah. But I think the answer is pretty self-evident. There very likely is a shortage of data engineering skills that could be applied to talented people. There are probably people out there with data engineering skills who just aren't talented. And I think an example of that is somebody, just what you pointed out, where maybe you've sort of just done the bare minimum to get by in your job. You're not doing anything that innovative or interesting. Like, you just happen to have a set of skills. And that's kind of the farthest you'll go in your career. Kind of like what the Peter principle indicates, right? Where like everyone, including you and me, eventually reaches like their highest level of incompetence in their position. And that's just, that's a general rule. Like, everybody watching this will happen to you. It seems to be a universal law where no matter how talented you think you are, how skilled, at some point you're going to reach that asymptote beyond which you can't travel any further. So
sometimes that means it's time to do something new, right?
Yep.
Shift to a different area where maybe, because sometimes it's not talent so much. Sometimes it's a problem of interest and engagement. People do burn out on their jobs, and then no matter how smart or talented they are, they're not going to be developing new skills or really doing a good job at what they do.
Yep, happens a lot. Technology, especially. I think this is and let's talk about retention for a bit, because I think this sort of ties into retention.
Yep.
Technology is definitely, it's a meat grinder. There's no other way to put it. Like, you either, Stuart Brand had this saying, about the steamroller of technology, where if you're not in the steamroller, you're getting crushed by the steamroller. And staying in the steamroller means you're staying ahead of sort of the current paradigms. Like, you're continuing to improve your skills, for example, right? And you're continuing to evolve your career. If you don't, you get smushed by the steamroller, and it just mercilessly keeps moving on. And that's kind of how it is. And this is exhausting to some people, honestly. Like you're either the kind of person who I think is masochistic and somehow likes this sort of, staying ahead of the steamroller game for a number of years. And I think those people do wonderfully in this type of a field. If you aren't, it's going to be hard to retain you. Right. And so, I would say for hiring managers too, like, managing burnout and balancing that against the ever evolving need to stay ahead of stuff. It's a constant, it's a big challenge with technology managers and teams. Like,
really is. Yeah. And there's a whole leadership problem here too. I think there are opportunities where leadership can make a difference, and especially in the transition to new technologies, we find people will get very, very resistant to learning something new. But with the right leadership, they'll see, oh, this is good for my career. This is exciting. They'll actually be ready to take that next step. Another frequent problem as people are like transitioning from one, say, database environment to another, say from something on-prem to a cloud-based database, is just frustration. And so if you throw people into a situation where like, yeah, they're trying, but they just get frustrated and they can't find any help, then they'll hate whatever new technology you're bringing in. If it's stuff like a Redshift or whatever, they're just going to absolutely hate it because it's just frustrating. Yeah.
So, I tend to agree. Like and I think it's incumbent upon managers these days to retain the talent you have, because your chance of finding the replacement is it won't be easy. It won't be easy. And despite what DICE says in their job report, where data engineering isn't as bad as other fields, well, I'm going to say it's still pretty bad. I mean, like I said, if we have friends from FANG companies hitting us up for recruiting questions, that kind of leads you to think that there's a bit of a gap right now. And retention is key, because it's going to be cheaper for you to retain your employees than it is to find new ones and get them retrained, and hoping to, that they don't leave in the meantime, while they're training. It's a tough one. So maybe some other things, retaining, right? So again, I think one theme of this discussion is people don't leave their jobs. They do leave their managers and they do leave their teams. So especially in the age of remote work, make sure that you're balancing, I guess just the realities of this new world that we live in, and we have lived in for the last year and a half. It's actually not that new. We've been doing remote for a while now. So perks like the snack bar that you'd always see at startups, for example, unlimited kombucha, all this other stuff, right? It doesn't matter because nobody's going to the office and eating snacks and drinking kombucha on tap anymore. Like this is not what it was. So what does matter though are the interactions with the team, as well as just a general sense of happiness about the type of work that they're doing. Because I think if COVID did anything too, it also exposed, like, is what I'm doing even meaningful?
That's
to
right.
me?
So people are going to reassess everything. It's like, do I even want to be in the tech industry? I mean, I've heard that a lot as well. People are just questioning their entire career track. Is there something else in my life that's going to be more meaningful, even if it pays less money? And so just throwing more money at people without making the job itself better is probably not that compelling.
Oh man, the number of people that I know who have left high-paying tech jobs to go do something else, like be a volunteer somewhere, be a gardener, that kind of stuff. I mean, this happens.
Go teach.
Teach. It's just like, because depending where you work, and depending, and this is for hiring managers, depending upon the environment that you create and the culture that you have, like this is really, the matter between somebody deciding, whether they're going to continue in tech or whether they're going to just exit the field and do something else entirely. And like, this is a pretty big deal, actually. They call it the Great Migration, or what was it called? There's some article that came out a few months ago where it talked about sort of this big shift going on in jobs in general, where people are just tired of it. They're kind of doing something, just finding more meaningful work. So I would say, like, for a manager, like, figure out the mission. This is also as for CEOs and everybody else. Like, what is the mission of your company? Like, why do people want to come work for you and put in the time when there's frankly other things you could be doing? So.
Yeah, another thing, we talked about this just briefly at the beginning of the discussion today, but there's the ops. So there's the steamroller that you talked about, and there's also the ops aspect of tech. And the ops aspect is really, really hard. And there are a lot of tech jobs now with, the advent of microservices and other things. You have these ops burdens kind of spreading out to more teams, which means that more and more people have to deal with these operational aspects. again, operations means, keeping things running. And that means that you might be on call sometimes. That means you might get paged in the middle of the night or on holiday. And that's very, very frustrating for people. And so I think anything you can do to reduce that kind of burden is also going to help people to be happier. Like people in the middle of being stuck at home still they want to be able to spend time with their families. They don't want to be woken up in the middle of the night, and they don't want to be interrupted on their days off.
And that's where I think investing in automation is key too. I mean, thankfully a lot of technology had come onto the scene that kind of pulled forward, 5 to 10 years of progress. And I would say there's just things you can do to automate a lot of the on-call stuff these days. I mean, on-call is still a reality, but making it an expectation, kind of out of the gate, I would say like find ways to automate too, which automation can bring happiness as well. But I know for us, as we've been building out the team at Ternary, like the thing we've been focusing on really is it's the culture of the company really. And like, that's primarily what we're trying to do is create a workplace where people want to work with us, and want to be really happy. We've had, I think great success at this so far. Hopefully we continue, but you can't take your eye off the ball, like culture and and all the stuff that I think people took for granted before. Like that's huge. And Russell, what's up, Russell? He asks, perhaps are also atop the when we're talking about the Steamroller Technology. Perhaps some are also atop the front roller of the Steamroller, like a log roll balance challenge. Yeah, it's totally a great mental picture of this. Kind of morbid, depending on what happens to them, but it's very accurate. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
The struggle is real, right? And so
struggle is real.
Yeah. It's interesting because I know people at Google who sometimes were working, 80, 90 hours a week, like absolutely insane hours. And I think people have been cynical about like the perks, like you were saying, like the gourmet chefs and on-site yoga and all these other things. They've been cynical about that for a long, long time because they knew that was a ploy to like keep them chained to their desks at work.
Well, the thing I would always, my big red flag was if I'd walk into an office and I would see a ping pong table. Right? Because I mean, that's normally a company that's trying to play startup. And by that, I mean, you're trying to like basically cargo cult a lot of the culture that supposedly attracts talent. A lot of this is adopted from bigger tech companies.
Right.
But yeah, the ping pong table is like by far my biggest red flag. If I saw that, then I knew the company, maybe they had a great culture, but for the most part, I think it was, the other thing is if you see a company using the word family a lot, either it's actually like a family or it's like you just joined a cult. But you be aware of these. I'm saying this to job seekers as well as managers. Like be careful the language you use. I think there's a lot of cargo culting of culture and practices to retain employees and make a fun workplace while you're working people to death at 80 hours a week, right? Like focus on like the kind of things that employees do care about, like seeing their families, but also doing a good job. So it's not just about ping pong tables, and thankfully, I can't think of any people who are playing those these days unless you're going to an office. But yeah, I just noticed this, throughout the 2010s where, startup culture was a cool thing and everyone wanted to make the cool startup culture. But for the most part, it was just basically just a facsimile of another company's culture where they weren't even bought into it to begin with. So,
yeah. Going back to the word family, I mean, people have their own families. They don't necessarily want their work family to be their family. Granted, you want to have good friendships and things, but you don't want that to be taking up your entire life. And I think
this said, though, I did read a book recently. I think it was The Culture Code, and it did talk about, how to build strong cultures. And the one thing, the word family did come up as something where a sense of family was one of the bigger contributors to a strong workplace culture. Right. But this is something where, so, I mean, on the one hand, if you have to call out that you're a family, I think that's where you kind of get,
I see.
If people feel like they're a part of something, and they give it 100%, even though they don't have to, like that, I think is when you have a family, when people are, got each other's backs, and that's what this book was talking about, where it's almost implicit. I think he was using the Spurs, the basketball team, as sort of the example of this, where the coach really fostered a sense of family. But but it wasn't like one of those things where you have to shout it out, like we're a family, and you need to have fun and be, if you have to shout those things out, you have exactly the opposite of what you're trying to shout out, probably.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Yeah. if people are protesting too much about how good their culture is, then it might not be.
Yeah. Marin, sense of family is a good result of a good work culture, not the goal of completely agree with this. This is so true. Guy Thompson, coding rockstar, ninja Jedi. Again, if you have to cargo cult a lot of these terms, come back, understand what you're doing. I mean, this is one of those things where I think it just helps, one-on-ones. I think for, if we talk about retention again, number one thing you could be doing as a manager is just talk to your people, see how they're doing. One-on-ones, if you haven't learned how to do a one-on-one, there are great resources out there. I still think the best resources I've seen have been the Manager Tools series. It's back from the 2000s.
Yeah.
These guys are a bit stuffy and I think a bit corporate, but their practices around one-on-ones I think are still unbeatable.
And Ask a Manager, I don't know if you've looked at that site, but that's really good. Yeah, it's just like people, anonymously ask questions about I had this problem as a manager at work. How would you deal with this? And it's pretty frank feedback about what you might be doing wrong as a manager to screw things up, which is a really good lesson for all of us who have people report to us. So.
Well, and I always use the Michael Scott test too. So if you've ever watched The Office, my whole litmus test is, Michael Scott, he's intentionally a buffoon of a character, right? And he's there to highlight basically just, I would say if Michael Scott does something, try and do the opposite of it.
Right.
And that tends to be my litmus test. It's a Michael Scott test. I came up with it. Or maybe other people have too. But it's just an observation of human behavior, really. But as a manager, just whatever he does, do the opposite. Same with David Brent, the British version of the character. Kind of actually going back to the job exodus real quick, I forgot to ask this because Marin asked he says the job exodus on the topic of attrition. Recently, I've seen many complaints that seniors are leaving, but the job market only hired seniors over the last years, demanding 5+ years of experience. What will we be calling people next?
Interesting. Huh. Yeah. So is there a terminology issue here? It's that whole isn't that a classic example of back in 2000 or something? There were job postings about people with 10 years of Java experience when Java hadn't been around.
Oh yeah.
Years. It seems like there are a lot of games played around the senior title, especially in data engineering. It's I want people with a lot of data engineering intuition who've used a lot of different tools over time, but a lot of the tools that companies are adopting now, they've been around for a while, but they haven't been popular for that long, right? Where are you going to find a senior Snowflake engineer with 10 years of experience? I mean, they do exist, but they're very rare and very, very expensive because Snowflake, it's been around for a while. It hasn't been popular for nearly that long.
He votes for super senior as the, I think that's a good one. But so I mean, you see this a lot too. It's something I hear about a lot in data science hiring, for example, right? Where, whereas in the mid 2010s, there weren't that many data scientists as a title, just because it was fairly new. Now all of a sudden, you fast forward 6 years, whatever. There's a lot of junior data scientists. I would say that's a glut, and you hear this a lot. But companies only want to hire senior talent. I think this is sort of a general rule, though, where I mean, if you want to hire somebody, you're going to want to try and find the most senior person possible. The problem is there's not a lot of these people. And so I think back to the question, what will we be calling people next? I just think we'll be calling them really expensive is what you're going to be calling them. Because if you're trying to hire only senior talent and they've left, well, they're probably not going to go back to the jobs they were just at. They might be looking for something new, and therefore they're going to get more expensive just because the sheer supply. Of course, this doesn't take into account the new seniors that will come on the scene, and the super seniors, as he puts it, that'll have graduated to the super senior role. But it's a tricky one.
Does this loop back to the question of just investing more in junior talent, in hiring people and training them, or training internally, hiring internally, these kinds of things?
Yeah, I think you're going to see more of a trend for that just because of sheer necessity. I mean, what is it? The last stat I saw, it was the U.S., I think it was the U.S., I don't know. It was short 500,000 data practitioners for certain data jobs, mainly data science and stuff, which it could be lumped into a bunch of other roles. But the point being, 500,000 gap's a 500,000 gap, right? I don't care how you slice it. You got just going to magically invent that many people. I know at our, at the school we teach at University of Utah.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people did they get into the MSIS program? I think it was like on the order of like in the hundreds. So, and that's just to make, MSIS or MSBA grads, right? And I don't know what the data science department there has, but it's probably similar-ish. So you're talking a number of tens to maybe a couple hundred per school per year. And so, yeah, the question is very natural. Well, okay, so I have this many to fill, and you guys can give me, this crumb here, this like atom out of like this many. And so how many more do I need? Where are you going to get that?
Yeah. I think creativity is in order, right? I mean, one thing we've seen at tech companies is that tech companies used to be known for like this very flexible Wild West culture. Like if you have talent, we'll let you do all kinds of interesting things. We'll let you shift jobs. We'll let you shift roles. And I won't say which tech company this happened at, but one of our friends like got passed over for a promotion because supposedly she did not have relevant experience, even though all the experience on her resume was relevant, but it wasn't the right job titles that they were looking for. They were looking for very specific job titles. It's like, oh no, you didn't have this job title and this job title, therefore you can't have this new role. And she's like, well, I've been doing basically this job for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
That's one way for an enterprise or tech company to shoot itself in the foot, is to become so rigid in its thinking in HR that there's no recognition of the opportunity to use the talent you have, or to use someone in a creative way where they can make a big contribution.
Yep. I would say a lot of these FANGs right now, and a lot of the big companies aren't FANGs. I mean, they're having trouble keeping people for precisely this reason. Again, it's the old saying that we talked about. People, don't leave their job, they leave their manager. And if you're not given the opportunity to move up, I was reading a stat the other day where it's like if you hadn't, basically for internal candidates, right? If you're an internal candidate and you don't get the position, you're very likely just to leave and do something else. Because at what point do you want to stick around? It's like, okay, I've already tried to get a job within my company. I've paid my dues and I can't. So maybe there's someone else. And again, the other stats I've read where, the best way to get pay increases and get more opportunity is to leave your company, go somewhere else. So
right. And I've heard that at tech companies. It's like, well, okay, I'm below band for this job. Like, what do you guys want to do? And they're like, oh, we'll just go get another offer and then you can have a pay raise. Like, yeah, but if someone gets another offer, they've got one foot out the door. Like, all they have to do is sign and they're gone. It's a very short-sighted retention practice.
Especially right now when hiring is like, insanely brutal. And, the other thing I would say too is, Glassdoor, that's another monkey wrench has been thrown into this, because back in the day, you'd have to rely on anecdotes. Now you can just rely on, people getting pissed or extremely happy, or they just have their recruiters write a bunch of high praise on their Glassdoor ratings. But, and I would take Glassdoor with a grain of salt, in the sense where people who leave negative reviews tend to have an axe to grind. That said, if you keep seeing the same things over and over in the Glassdoor reviews, if you're a hiring manager, or if you're a hiring manager and you see this at your company, maybe about your team, it might be time to look in the mirror and maybe do a personal assessment of how you could improve things. If you're a candidate looking for roles and you see consistently the same sorts of Glassdoor reviews, that might be an indication that that's what you're walking into.
Yeah, and in general, like, yes, the people with an axe to grind are going to be oversampled, but that's going to be true for any company. And so in general, Glassdoor is still a valid tool for comparison between companies, maybe the exception being an extremely small company where the data sample size is small. One really negative review can really skew the results. But for big companies, like, probably gives you a pretty good, clear picture of what you might be walking into.
Yeah, totally.
I'll add this at the end. Oh, we have another question.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can read it.
Well, this is what I was actually going to address. And I don't know if algorithms are the problem or some other technique, but I think in general, recruiting is really an unsolved problem. And maybe that's more what we've seen, even than this idea that there's a specific shortage in data engineering. I think what we've seen working with a lot of different companies is that recruiting is very, very hard. It's hard to find talent that's really going to function well in your company. It's hard to find people who learn the specific skills that you need them to have. There's a data shortage, I would say, as well. Like, I like this DICE data. At the same time, when I look at it, I can see maybe where we would like to have more specifics on cloud skills, for example, on specific types of technology that are not here. So yeah, in terms of startup ideas,
it's hard to find good recruiters too.
Yep. That's
I mean, the number of terrible recruiters I see. I mean, I just need to open up my LinkedIn messages, and I see messages from people asking for me if I want to become an Android developer at a company, or if I, want to be a front end UI developer with React. I'm like, I've never indicated on my LinkedIn or my resume that I have any of those skills. I may have written React in my spare time, but that does not make me qualified for a job in that area. And so, but you see this a lot. There's I would say part of it too is I'd be curious to know, like, again, there's a lot of job postings. Again, and how many of these go unfilled? And then diving deeper into that question, how many of these, how much of this has to do with just kind of crappy recruiters to begin with? I mean, maybe that industry needs to shake up too. So, but I have some friends who have worked at, I'm not going to name names of companies, but, sort of AI enabled interview companies and stuff, with video interviews and stuff. And I think that there's a lot of potential with these technologies. At the same time, it still feels like it's really early days. And in terms of resume sifting, the only danger I see with that is you might miss some hidden gems in the mix. I would say the types of people that I've successfully recruited weren't the most obvious candidates, right? I still remember, like, one of the smartest, best programmers that I'd hired was a teenager actually who had sent me a resume. He didn't finish college. He walked into the office unannounced, wearing like a nose ring and combat boots. And he's like, "Hey, I just want to say hi." And I'm like, "Why are you here?" Then it's like, "Well, okay, he's got gumption. I'll take a few minutes out and, do a quick whiteboard with him," and ended up hiring him. He was actually probably a better engineer than a lot of this quote senior engineers that we had on the team. This kid had also been, coding since I think he was like under 10. So he may have actually been programming longer, but the whole point is you just don't know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. In fact, everyone is looking for that kind of diamond in the rough, right? In other words, someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of experience, but can learn very, very quickly and is creative and can make contributions that maybe you weren't even looking for, but is still capable of working with the team and getting along with people and not blowing things up. Like,
yeah, that helps.
Yeah,
but part of this though is I think it does come down to, I hate the term cultural fit. I think that tends to sort of bias your hiring decisions based upon, well, is this person like one of us?
Right.
But at the same time, it really does come down to some sort of like, we mentioned the word family before, and I think it's kind of, I think Guy Thompson actually, he wrote a comment here. I'm not sure I agree with family so much as I do like having a solid team. Like, I think what you got to assess for, and this is always the crapshoot with hiring, right? Where can this person function on our team? Even if they're not a cultural fit, in some cases, I would say you don't want somebody to be a cultural fit because you get too much homogeneity in the picture.
Groupthink.
And you get too, right? Right. I want contrarians. I want people who think different, who are going to call us out. Like, that's how actually I think you have a better team. If you have a bunch of yes men on your team and yes women, it's like, what's the point? You may as well just, I don't know, find a way to algorithmically like clone those people or something. So,
and I think even in recruiting, this is a big problem where, say you do have a Java dev team and you're like, oh, let's go find all these people who have 10 years of Java experience. Well, there tends to be kind of a profile that goes with 10 years of Java experience. Not universal, but it tends to be like very enterprisey software devs, frankly. And you might be better off pulling in a Python developer and training them in Java just to kind of have some fresh blood in the mix, like to mix things up a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, it's going to take a while to train them up, but you actually might end up with a better outcome in the end. The other thing I'm going to say about this family comment is that we're kind of, I think enterprises and tech companies have sort of co-opted this idea of family, and really, like, people have their own families they want to spend time with. So I do like the idea of just calling it team. Like, let's stop pretending that we're going to be your family and let's be your team instead, and let you have your own life outside of work.
The
appropriation
exactly.
of people's lives,
Yeah, I think it's just asking a ton, right? Yeah. Like, I think we do a pretty good job at this, even with the small team we have, where we actively encourage people, like, go do stuff outside of work, please. Like, if you're around us too much, on one hand, that's very flattering. On the other hand, like, you're probably going to get tired of us after a bit. And you just need other interests, and your family and your friends, that's much of a part of your life as work should be. We don't have a 966 culture or whatever it is in China, where you just work everyone to death. And read the other day about somebody who at a Chinese tech company who like died in the break room just because they just work themselves to death. Like that's not a family. That's just a horrible situation, really. So
yeah,
it kind of makes me wonder, like, how many tech companies, if they could do that they would do it. Whereas in China right now, I think that the government's actually going to put the kibosh on the 996 culture or 966, whatever it is, because they're like, this isn't working for our culture that we're trying to build in a society.
So. I mean, yeah, it's. I think this has gone on because you have this kind of new middle class. They're coming from nothing. All of a sudden, they have this opportunity to make a lot of money, and so it was easy to work people to death. And I wonder, even in the United States, we haven't had exactly that work culture, but I think we did see that type of work culture emerge in the tech industry for a while. And maybe with COVID and with people reassessing life priorities, we're kind of shifting away from a lot of that now.
Yeah. And I think it's generally a good thing, right? I mean, it's a balance like anything. And so, to kind of bring it back, hiring and retaining data engineers, I think we can agree it's not a problem really unique to data engineering. We kind of started this talk off by wondering, okay, because we get hit up by a lot of people asking us if we know data engineers who are looking for work, if maybe this is particular to data engineering. I think we're in agreement. It's not just a tech issue either. I just think right now there's a hiring shortage, period. Like, people aren't looking for work in the same way they were before COVID.
Another thing I'll say about these numbers. So I'm looking at the top 50 tech occupations by job posting volume. Look at the stats here.
What page is that on?
Oh, this is on page 19. So it's one of the main pages you were looking at. So, okay, data engineering is number 29 by their ranking algorithm, but it's year over year 15% growth in postings. Like that number is insane. It only pales in comparison to other job postings that are even more insane, like project manager, which is 19%. Like, to see that kind of growth in any industry is absolutely bonkers. Like,
it is pretty bonkers.
So it doesn't mean that, like, there is a lot of demand for data engineer. There might be even more demand for other, like, technical manager, or other domains in the tech industry and other roles. But it's all of these numbers are absolutely insane, except for like front end developer, which I don't know the difference between that and like web developer that's showing massive growth. Where did that go?
Right. So it'd be interesting to kind of cherry pick the data here. I don't know if I have time to do it. If anyone in the audience does,
And again, VBA 20% year over year. Like, it's just crazy.
Let me see. Warren, you say 9 to 5 work culture, but you're always broadcasting in the evening from a European perspective. Well, it's our morning here, so I will say you're the one watching it in the evening too. Yeah. So touche. But anyway, nice dig there. Cool. So anyway, it's Labor Day, and ironically, we're talking about not working on a holiday. But like I said, we have a lot of audience that doesn't reside in the U.S. and
and this was fun. I mean, this was, even by the standards of our usual chats, this one was a lot of fun. So
and thanks to the audience again for the fun comments and questions and whatnot. If you're watching on YouTube, or even if you aren't, please subscribe to our channel there. Smash the like button on the video. For people watching on LinkedIn, awesome. Thanks for. Well, I'm surprised people are on LinkedIn. And this is actually one of the tests we want to do is, would people watch our show on Labor Day here? And I'm not sure how many people from the US are watching, but we do find it amusing. And
so I assume you get LinkedIn notifications on your phone, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I was getting them on my watch for a while. I'm like, this is super annoying. I turn them off. Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, I'm sure people are getting hit up by their phones and their watches by LinkedIn, and some of them, hopefully that was
Mhm.
valuable if you got something out of this talk. But at the same time, go do something cool today.
Yeah,
Enjoy your
yeah, and
coffee
like I
at some
say, even
point.
if it's your evening, say you're in Europe, for example, yeah, go for a walk or have some fun. I know, today I know I'm going to be working on our book and
Yeah.
probably going to go uh, climbing later. So
Yeah, it's kind of an insane time for us, let's be honest. Where
yeah,
you look at things, you're like, oh, I have time to just work on the book, which will be so relaxing compared to all the other stuff that I'm doing on other
uh-huh,
days. Someday it'll
yeah,
get better. I think that's just the nature of running a small
yeah.
business.
I would say if you don't want to have any time for anything, like definitely start a business.
Mhm.
Like yeah, it's much easier just to go have a job. Like one of my old bosses said, who was a CEO of a company, he said, "Yeah, my idea of a vacation is a 60-hour a week," and I didn't realize what he meant until started running a business. And I'm like, "Yeah, he's right. He's so right."
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say for anyone who is out there and has a job and doesn't run a business, have a nice day.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and
And
please get the hell off of a LinkedIn video and go do something fun with your
yep,
day.
yep.
So.
Take care of your work-life balance, recharge, decompress, whatever you need to do.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, next Monday, I know we've been talking about the undercurrents of data engineering,
Yeah.
but I think that'll be the topic for next week. We wanted to maybe keep it kind of focused on work since it is Labor Day in the U.S., but we'll get back on track with some data engineering talk. So
Yeah.
cool, man. All right, Matt. Well, we'll have a nice Labor Day.
All right.
That's
Sounds good.
mainly a joke. Yeah. All
I'll
right.
see you online, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Hate
for
to say
sure.
it. That's true.
All right. Have a good one.
All right. Take care.
Bye.